Today we're going to talk about the Level 2 Adult Care Diploma, and we're talking about communication in care settings topic. We're talking about being able to reduce barriers to communication. That's going to be a big part of being an effective communicator in social care settings. The first thing we want to do is be able to identify some barriers to communication. So, thinking about that, some common ones that we might think of are different languages, different cultures, sensory impairments, learning difficulties, and intoxication. So, starting at the top, different languages. If someone you're working with speaks a different language from you, that is going to create a barrier. It's going to make things difficult. Same with different cultures. Now, this could just be like thinking in the UK and Ireland, when we say boot, we mean the car boot, but Americans might say trunk. And when you say boot, they think it's a shoe. So that is a cultural difference. You will have other cultural differences as well, and some of them will be more pronounced and harder to get over than that, what's really a dialect difference. But with these, we'll get into how you overcome barriers to communication later. They are something that you can overcome. Sensory impairment as well, sight loss or hearing loss. This includes complete sight or hearing loss and degrees of this. Um, even even a slight reduction in hearing can make things more difficult, and therefore it's a barrier. The same with sight loss. Most of us focus on hearing for communication, but sight is a big part of it. Remember, if you watched the last video, we talked about the importance of observing people's reactions, including body language and facial expressions. You will get that from sight. If you have sight loss, that makes it more difficult. Learning difficulties as well. This might include, it could even include dyslexia, or it can include more severe learning difficulties and difficulties with language and memory. Intoxication is another one that I'm including here because when people are intoxicated with alcohol or drugs, processing communication becomes more difficult, as well as a common one, a common symptom of intoxication is slurred speech. So that makes it more difficult for others to understand you if you are intoxicated. So it's one to consider. All right. So how can we reduce the barriers to communication? Let's say with different languages. There are a few options here. One, if it's a person that you're working with regularly, it would be to begin by learning some key phrases. If nothing else, it'll make that person feel like you care enough to learn the basics like please, thank you, good morning, how are you? It won't be perfect. It takes a long time to learn a language properly. But if you are going to be working with somebody regularly, I would recommend trying to learn a bit of the language yourself. Now, other options might be translators or interpreters. This can be expensive on a daily basis, so it's not usually what you do on a daily basis. But for key meetings, like care plan reviews, you would really want to have somebody there who can interpret. Now, this can be a family member if you're sure they're non-biased and working in the best interest of the service user. Then it can certainly be a family member or friend that acts as an interpreter. But in certain situations, you would want an outside party to come in if it's, let's say, a safeguarding situation. Other options that you might use daily could be translation apps. Google Translate is fairly good nowadays, especially with the more popular languages like French, Spanish, German. I've tested myself and they are fairly accurate. with decent grammar. Some languages are still not great, but you could definitely get some words here or there that could help you. You just have to be very careful and think it through. I'm sure there are other options as well. Let's talk about sensory loss. If somebody has hearing loss, let's say, you might write things down for them instead. That might be your first stop. Again, if you're working with a lot of people who have hearing loss who use sign language, it might be worth thinking about taking a course and learning some sign language. Or you can go on, there are a lot of YouTube channels or even apps that will help you to learn sign language. So it might be worth, again, learning some basic words and phrases. People will appreciate that. Or you might need an interpreter. For sight loss, again, I mentioned before, it's not one that we think of so much as having an impact on communication, but it can. You might want to think about putting some more animation into your voice if you don't have the facial expressions and the hand gestures and the body language to support what you're saying, to be very clear, to be very explicit about what words you're choosing. You might want to ask the person, I say might, you definitely do, you want to ask the person about their preferences. A lot of people, let's say older people who have home care support coming into their homes, they often have a little key safe outside, and if somebody's coming in, for everyone you want to announce yourself, but this is especially important for people who have sight loss. You want to make sure they know you're coming and that they know who you are, so they won't be put out. If you weren't respecting that, a lot of older people have said to me, and a lot of carers have said to me that that they have heard complaints about people coming in, especially for people with sight loss. Because they don't announce themselves properly, it leads to a lack of trust, because the first thing those service users are experiencing when their carers come to visit them is a little fright. So that's not very helpful. Back to different cultures. Being aware of differences, like everybody is different. You can have differences between the within the UK. You'll definitely have differences. Things might be a little bit different up in Scotland to in England or Wales or Northern Ireland. Things might be a little different. When you go further afield, they might be even more different. That's not to say anyone is doing culture wrong or living their lives wrong. Culture and different cultures make things more interesting, and I think it's great if we can share these things a bit more. But it's important to be aware of differences. Where culture might lead to a communication barrier is where maybe we don't understand somebody's tradition, and maybe we might say something about it being a bit weird. It's not great to say that about somebody's culture, and that will put up a barrier if people feel like they're being judged. It's important all throughout your work to try and be non-judgmental as much as you can, because people will shut down and they won't trust you if they feel like they're being judged, and they won't share things with you. It's important, if you don't understand, to do a little research on different cultures, on different traditions, and to ask people what their own preferences in. You can't assume just from somebody is from a certain place that they like to do a certain thing that you found on Wikipedia that is, according to Wikipedia, part of their culture. You can't assume it. But it's good to support people as well. If somebody has a tradition or a traditional holiday, it might be good to support them to do something to celebrate that. And again, that'll build trust and break down some of these barriers. Another area to think about is learning difficulties. Let's say if somebody is nonverbal or has difficulty speaking, some people use Makaton. If you haven't heard of Makaton, it's like a simplified version of sign language. You do have different versions in different countries, just to be aware, but in the UK, the one that's mainly used is Makaton. And that can help people. It's not just for people who are nonverbal as well, just to be aware. Sometimes you will have people who are verbal using Makaton as well, because it's often easier for people to process visual information first, and support that with the verbal information. Other options that people might use are, let's say, communication passports or communication board, maybe picture boards, and they are specific usually to that individual. They'll be built for that individual and their likes. And people can communicate by pointing on the communication board to what they want, and what they want to get across to you. Other things that might be, I didn't mention with sight loss, and I should have, would be Braille, the raised bumps on paper in certain patterns that people can read by touching them. Also, another one would be having larger fonts. If somebody has a visual impairment but they're not completely blind, they might appreciate larger fonts to help them to see it. So on to intoxication. If someone is intoxicated, there's going to be a limit to the depth of communication that you can have. It's not going to be the right time to talk about risk assessment reviews or care plan reviews. It's going to be best to wait and come back another time. Aside from that, remaining calm is the best thing that you can do, and just wait for people to be over the effects of A, being intoxicated, and B, hangovers are not going to help your communication either. People are not usually in a good place to take in information in those situations. Okay, moving on. Right, how can you check? That last question about how to reduce communication barriers, if you're doing the level 2, that's an observation question. You don't have to write anything for that, but you have to be able to show that you were doing it in some way. So it might be that you show that you are making sure somebody's hearing aid, that the battery is okay. It might be that, let's say, if somebody has hearing loss on one side, that you position yourself to the other side, to the good ear. A lot of people have said to me, talk over here to my good ear. So that is one way to show that you are reducing the barriers to communication. Another observation criteria is this: checking that communication has been understood. It can be as simple as asking the individual, did you understand that? Is that okay? Maybe asking them to repeat it back to you. It can be you could rephrase it for them. If it's something that you've shown them, if you've shown them how to do something, like operating a new microwave or operating the new washing machine, in those cases, asking them to demonstrate what you've shown them, then you'll know that they've understood it, and you'll have shown for the observation that you have checked communication has been understood. Another question that is a writing question now is, what sources of information, support, and guidance are available to enable more effective communication? So for this, you need to identify where you can find sources of, make sure you're covering information, support, and guidance. For information, you could look up websites. The Alzheimer's Society has some excellent information on how to support people with dementia. They also have good YouTube videos, and YouTube in general is a good place to start. I would list particular channels and websites for this. I've listed Mind there. They have some good information on how to help and support people who have mental health difficulties. You would look up your own organization's policies and procedures, because there will often be something there about communication. You could look at individuals' care plans as well. Check the care plans, and it should have information there about communication needs and preferences. If they have any specific needs, and if they've said what in particular they would like done for them. Other people that might be able to provide support and guidance might be speech and language therapists. They would support the service user to try and develop their speech. Again, let's say after they've had a stroke, oftentimes people have difficulty speaking or with their throats. Speech and language therapists can help with that. They might give you guidance on exercises to do with people on a daily basis to help support their recovery. Same with similar to occupational therapists. An occupational therapist can be very good with helping individuals to find ways to cope with the world and to manage things better. So they might be able to talk to you as well as contributing to the care plans and support plans. They might be able to give you a bit of guidance on exercises to do with the individuals you work with. Other people you might want to have involved are translators or interpreters, including British Sign Language interpreters. We often forget British Sign Language interpreters, but we shouldn't. They're important. But translators as well, they would be a source of support. Another source of, well, two sources of information, support, and guidance could be senior colleagues and the line manager. If you have any difficulties, the first people that you'd usually ask are your senior colleagues and your line manager of how they would normally deal with these situations and what they could do. Could they show you methods that work for them? Or can they help you to put something in place if the situation's changed? Right. So those are your sources of information, support, and guidance. Again, I'm sure you can think of more yourself, but these are some examples to get you started. So that is the end of being able to reduce barriers to communication. Thank you for watching. I hope it's been some help to you.